Gansler. I'm the Manager of Energy, Resilience, and Sustainability Policy for the American Association of Port Authorities. We're the nation and the hemisphere's trade association for public port authorities with just over 80 members in the United States who we do government relations work for, and over 36 members throughout the Americas, both in Canada and in Latin America. I know I am right before lunch on the schedule here, so I'll try to be engaging and certainly won't keep anyone over time, and looking forward to connecting with some folks maybe at the lunch buffet. So the American Association of Port Authorities has really been leaning into these energy and environment conversations lately. We have launched what we call the POWERS program, or Port Opportunities with Energy, Resilience, and Sustainability. And this program was launched just last summer, really out of a desire from our membership to focus on these topics, because the industry was seeing these new technologies like hydrogen were becoming the future and really will be the future of the maritime and port industry. So we established the POWERS program with 5 policy pillars. Export of Made in America, and you'll see just about all of these topics touch and can interact with hydrogen. But export of Made in America energy to markets across the globe, alternative fuels, which obviously includes hydrogen, electrification, which can go hand in hand with hydrogen, energy and coastal resilience, making sure ports have enough energy to keep their operations on all the time, and offshore wind, a type of renewable energy which is reliant on port infrastructure and could power the generation of hydrogen. So just a little plug, we have our own events as well as an association, and coming up in January in Tampa Bay is the POWERS Program Summit and Expo, January 22 to 25. You can go to AAPA-ports.org to learn more about that. But diving into why I'm here and why you're here is the technology and the policy. So this graph that you see here represents the amount of federal funding that is available for port infrastructure. So there's basically two lines you can see here. There's the bar graph, which shows how much funding is available to port authorities. And that includes funding that port authorities are eligible to compete for, maybe against other modes of transportation. And then the dotted line you'll see about halfway up those bars is how much funding has actually been awarded to port authorities each year, or is projected to be awarded to port authorities each year. So basically what you see here is a dramatic increase in funding for port infrastructure in the United States. And this is thanks primarily to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But through many different programs, there's just more money than ever before available for port infrastructure. It's gone up from about $1.3 billion from the federal government in 2014 to about $6 billion in this fiscal year. So there's more opportunities than ever before to really install transformational projects at port authorities. Here's just a selection of a few of the many programs that may be particularly useful for hydrogen projects. You're probably familiar with the DOE Hydrogen Hubs program, which several port authorities have applied for as part of coalitions with their regions. We're very hopeful that some of that funding will make its way to maritime applications. There's the EPA Clean Ports program funded by the Inflation Reduction Act, which is $3 billion for zero-emission port equipment, which can include hydrogen-powered, probably mostly land-based equipment, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. There's the Maritime Administration Port Infrastructure Development Program, which awards about $700 million per year for cargo handling equipment and freight movement projects in general. There's the EPA Diesel Emissions Reduction Act, a long-standing program that's available to mitigate emissions from existing diesel-emitting equipment. And there's the DOE Charging and Fueling Infrastructure, which is a program that's distributed through state governments through a formula and is available for the charging and fueling infrastructure that will power this kind of equipment. So next, with the bulk of the presentation here, I'm going to go through what kinds of applications are port authorities looking at for hydrogen. There's a lot of different types of equipment and different applications that port authorities could be great fits for hydrogen for. I'm sure across this summit you're hearing about all different kinds of industries that hydrogen could be a good fit for, I would argue there's no better fit than the maritime industry, just due to the nature of cargo handling vessels that crisscross the world's oceans, delivering cargo. They're very difficult to decarbonize. A lot of the options being looked at by other industries for decarbonization aren't good fits for maritime. Liquid fuels like hydrogen, like ammonia and methanol are relatively good fits, and the case that we make as an association is due to port's coastal position, where you have rail, trucks, and marine vessels all meeting at one point at a port authority. Any investment you make in infrastructure at a port authority, including hydrogen, will kind of cascade outwards, those economic benefits. Hydrogen produced or moved to a port authority could be used in all of these different sectors. So first you'll see here landside equipment. Port authorities use many different kinds of equipment to move cargo around at a freight port, of whether it's container, bulk, liquid bulk, or dry bulk. All these different kinds of ports moving different types of cargo use several different types of cargo handling equipment. And then ports that move either passengers by ferries or by cruise also have their own types of equipment. What you see on the slide here is a rubber tire gantry crane at the Port of Vancouver, Canada, Canada's largest port. And these gantry cranes are due to be retrofit with hydrogen fuel cells. Typically, these massive cranes run on diesel. Increasingly, they're being electrified, but they use a lot of electricity and take a long time to charge. So between cranes, drayage trucks, and other types of cargo handling equipment, ports are looking for ways to decarbonize these vehicles, but the problem they're running into often is they take a long time to charge if you're running on a battery. So a hydrogen fuel cell as an alternative could be particularly attractive because you can refill the hydrogen for one of those pieces of equipment in a tenth of the time, maybe even less, than it would take to charge a battery. Next, we have just energy resilience, and ports are increasingly looking at their energy systems and supply chains to make sure they can keep the power on 24/7. Ports move cargo 365 days a year. They move passengers. The cruise seasons vary, but they can't afford to have a day disrupted in their yearly schedules. So they're increasingly looking at ways to make sure the power can stay on. What we've seen in recent years is as ports start to electrify more and more equipment, now you're increasingly reliant on the electric grid. Whereas if you're using diesel for all of your equipment, you have a diesel tank. If you run out of diesel, a new tank can be trucked in probably a day, maybe less. Or you may even have pipelines delivering the fuel. Now that we're developing more electrified infrastructure, all of a sudden we're more reliant on that. There have been examples where in recent years there have been heat waves in California. Everyone in the state turns on their air conditioner at the same exact time, and all of a sudden the port, which is running electrified equipment, doesn't have the power it needs and is actually called by the utility and told to shut off some of their electrified equipment. So ports are looking at microgrids, which are kind of localized energy systems I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and backup systems, as well as just diversifying the types of energy they have. So having hydrogen stored on hand in a tank or delivered by a pipeline could give you that backup energy you need in case the electricity goes out, in case there's a heat wave and you need to switch to another type of energy. The picture you see here is the Joint Command and Control Center and Jacobson Pilot Services at the Port of Long Beach, one of America's busiest ports. This is the building where they coordinate all of the operations at the port. If this building loses electricity, the port shuts down, which obviously is not ideal. So they put a microgrid in place, or they're developing it right now, to ensure that in the event of a blackout, this building has power and it's able to coordinate the port's activities. Next, we have shore power. Shore power is the concept of when a vessel reaches the berth at a port, it doesn't continue to run its engines on board consuming diesel. It plugs into the local power grid to use electricity instead. This has become more and more popular in recent years because ports, or rather vessels, emit various types of emissions, but particulate matter, NOx and SOx in particular, that can be harmful to the local communities that live near a port. When you're out at sea, obviously not near that many people, but when you're in a port, people are breathing in those fumes. So ports are increasingly looking at ways to eliminate or mitigate those emissions while the vessel's in port specifically. So with shore power systems, as you see in the picture here, you have a large plug that attaches itself into the ship and provides electricity so the vessel can turn off its engines while it's in the port. Here you see a cruise vessel plugging in for shore power at the Port of San Diego. Problem is, it costs $20 million per berth to install a shore power system. And a large port will have several berths. This is obviously very expensive. Plus, you need to go to your utility and say, now I need this many additional megawatts every time a ship docks at the port. One concept that's increasingly gaining some traction is having kind of a mobile shore power unit, where through a fuel cell, even a hydrogen fuel cell, that could maybe even fit inside a container, you could move that around the port. So when a vessel docks, you just move your fuel cell container over to the dock and plug it right in. No need for the electric grid. The hydrogen could be generated elsewhere. So this could, of course, be done with any number of fuels as long as you can easily deliver it from its storage spot to the berth. And port authorities have, of course, if you're moving containers, you have easy access to a drayage truck that can move a container around in a matter of minutes. So this is a concept that's increasingly becoming popular. And I would say as soon as companies have this technology, many are developing it now, but as soon as it's ready for deployment, you're going to have a lot of customers interested in it. Then we have hovercraft and inland tug traffic, and inland traffic. So between tugboats, towboats, barges, and ferries, these are smaller vessels that, again, are running on more traditional bunker fuel. They're all good applications for hydrogen. And here in the picture, you see the world's first hydrogen-powered tugboat, which is in use now at the Port of Antwerp. And then lastly, what I call the trillion-dollar question, ocean-going vessels. And here you see a picture of Maersk's, the world's biggest container carrier, a green methanol-fueled container carrier that is now in service, that has just arrived in Europe after it was built in Asia. The world's ocean carriers are looking at options to decarbonize, switch away from bunker fuels, and hydrogen is a leading contender. But hydrogen could also be used as a feedstock for other fuels like ammonia or methanol. And the closer you can do this fuel generation, conversion from hydrogen to methanol or ammonia, the closer you can do that to a coastal area where the vessels will be bunkering those fuels, the better, because then obviously you need less infrastructure to transport that fuel. So port authorities are right now looking at plans to produce or generate or export or bunker these fuels, and ocean carriers are scrambling for access to low and zero emission fuels. Any company in partnership with a port authority that can stand up large-scale production of hydrogen and transfer that into ammonia or methanol in some cases, will have a lot of ships calling at that port looking for that fuel. So with a couple of minutes left, I will stop there and maybe take a question or two and hopefully talk to many of you over lunch. Thank you.
Good morning, Jeff Stokes from PSEG, and we're working on developing can make sure I don't say what I'm not supposed to say. We're working on developing a hydrogen production project at the Port of New York and New Jersey. So we're specifically looking at drayage trucks, and we're actually looking at production right on the port. I guess my question is, to my understanding, it is better to transport hydrogen in ammonia form than even liquid. Is that a really big process to convert your hydrogen to ammonia? And
my background's in policy, and I'm certainly no chemist or engineer. I can't. What I've been told by people smarter than myself is that you're right. It's more economical to transport hydrogen as ammonia, just because of the higher energy density of ammonia. I think it's certainly not an easy process to convert hydrogen into ammonia, but unfortunately I can't really speak to the engineering aspects. Sure. I think we're maybe out of time. We'll talk after. So thank you all for your time, for coming today, and for your interest in this issue.